and don't even worry about the scale. Just make sure they're going to fit on there.
Okay.
And let go of that sense of, like, the subway is smaller than a building, so I have to scale it down. It doesn't matter. You want to have fun with it, and maybe the subway's the most important part of New York right now, so it's going to be more important than the buildings, which we'll see in the hierarchy of sizes. And that's why I'm having you guys do analog instead of digital, because digital gives you too much liberty to scale it up and down and manipulate it. If you do analog, you kind of have to stick with that. And you can still scale it before you print it, you know?
Yeah.
But once it's there, it's like, you might as well use it as it is,
Right.
and then cut pieces out. If you want to give it a color overlay, you can edit it before you print it. Or you could just like use a highlighter to go over it and color a black and white image. So like the subway's yellow or something. Yeah, and then you also want to use 3D pieces and textures if you have any. So, for instance, you could use something like a paper towel, and then let's say you have a marker and you want to showcase that, I don't know, like, let's say water levels rising. You would get a blue marker and have it bleed onto the bottom of it, and it looks like it's creeping, and then put that on the bottom, and it would give some texture to it. And talk maybe about the urban fabric being infiltrated by water on like a whole different level, because it has like a fabric look on it.
Yeah.
So you could do something like that. You could also use string. So if you buy some string and you want to be like, you know, like those conspiracy boards where they have all
the strings connecting,
You could use those and be like, I want to physically connect them to show you the points that I'm making. Or for your annotations, I don't think I put it on here, but you could make your strings the annotation lines if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And you could even color code them. Like the red is urban planning, the yellow is infrastructure. Yeah, and then you don't have to keep them separate either. So you can connect them with bridges and subways if you want. And maybe that's the only thing that connects one to the other, and otherwise they're separate islands. Or you can make it a whole continuous thing that's like morphing into the other. But that's all up to you.
Okay.
For this week, I would just focus on printing things, cutting them, and then layering them and playing with them. Don't glue anything down yet.
Okay.
And then...
How big does the paper have to be again?
24 by 18.
Okay.
So it's going to be... If you buy a bristle pad, they're 24 by 19 sheets. And then you would just have to trim down an inch to make it 18, which is why I chose that size. But... if you know any classmates, you can just share the cost of a bristle pad amongst yourselves. I think they're like $15 to $20. And then it would only be like less than $1 per sheet because they come in like packs of 20 or 12 or something like that.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask you to do something this large for the rest of the collages. They'll be a little smaller.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's another great resource to have, just those big sheets, because you might need them in future studios for making drawings and such.
Okay.
Yeah, and then as far as size goes, it's just approximate. I don't need you to literally give me 72-point font. But if you wanted to just print a page to give your sense of scale, just write something in 72 to have it side by side for comparison. I had someone that was like, should we just print this as 18 by 24 and copy it as a template? And I was like, no, it's too expensive. So if you do want a sense of scale, you could do that, or you could just do PDF true to size to have it digitally show you the size.
Okay.
Right. But that's about it. If you have more questions, we have this week, next week, and let's do the week after that.
Okay.
So we could meet up again next week if you have preliminary layouts.
All right, cool. All right.
Now for the actual PowerPoint. Okay, so Baroque planning.
Was it was lecture 6, right? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I gotta do all this stuff.
It's fine. Right, so I'll just begin giving a small intro. So the Baroque happens around 16 to 1650, which we see as a peak in population at this point. So we've emerged from the plague, which I told you guys previously is the reason that the pyramid fails and why the merchants take over. But at this point, it's been around 300 years, which gives us enough generations to recover this pyramid. So the church and the king are now back in power, absolute power. Today we talked about what that princely absolute power looks like, so we'll just talk about the church side now, which is going to be your bishop rule. And specifically looking at Rome. So we talked about this, I think like 2 weeks ago. that we have the Vatican being this little like fort on the other side of the river, and then the rest of Rome with ruined aqueducts, medieval walls, we know because they're not bastions just yet. And so the Pope of Rome at the time is also going to be the ruler of Rome, right? Because remember, the Vatican's a separate entity, and then we have the city of Rome. And so because it's a city like any other city, it's going to need its own bishop and its own cathedral. So the Pope isn't just the Pope of the Vatican, he's also the Bishop of Rome, and that church is right here. So he has to go from here to here through all of this, which is dangerous because you can get robbed, diseases, it's nasty, the roads are bad. And then this is the ancient Colosseum, Republican Forum, Augustinian, Trajan's Forum, so all the ancient Roman stuff is here. So he has to go through all the ruins, which at this point are like cow grazing farms. And so what we're going to focus on today is the connection between this and then the Rome, which is going to happen here. So if you notice, I put these like blocks on here because there was only one bridge at the time.
Like that?
Yes. So I'll just skip through them. Yeah, so I covered the bridges because we only have one connection. These don't even exist back then. So the only way into the Vatican is through our fort. And we know it's Renaissance because of bastions.
Yeah.
So if we zoom into this area, we have what we call our Banchi trident here. So 1, 2, 3, and this is the concept of the trivium. So this one, if we go back here, leads us all the way to the church somehow, right? It's messy, but somehow it gets us there. And it's a nice and a much grander entrance than what we have previously. So Pope goes through here. Remember that these are the papal palace. Or wait, you weren't here for the lecture. This is the papal palace behind St. Peter's. He has to go through here, through this wall we see, which is a bridge that leads us here, over, and then down. So that's the Via Papale. Now, this whole circle is called the Bianchi, or the bank circle. And that's going to be all our rich merchant families. So they're going to have outposts in Rome for a reason. Because it's the bank, and they have money, what they do is they loan money to the Vatican. Because the Vatican doesn't have its own lands or its own military, it really just relies on its cathedrals. Sometimes it's in trouble, and so your Medicis, Sforzas, Estes, they're all going to be here ready to loan to the Pope in exchange for gifts like making one of them a cardinal, which eventually leads to them becoming a Pope. So it's a big deal to be the first to help the Pope. So one of those is going to be our famous Medicis. This is their palazzo. And in order to raise, I guess, more interest in their family and make themselves look good, what you do is you give the Vatican another church. So they create the Basilica of the Florentines, because they're from Florence. And they disguise it as a gift from the city of Florence to the Pope. And so they take advantage of this new road and they build their road off of that. So that's the Medici branch of the Trivium. And then this is the first time that we see in history this sense of symmetry in urban planning. So this doesn't lead anywhere, right? There's like an opening today, but at the time there wasn't like a palazzo or anything important. It was purely done for aesthetic reasons so that it looked equal.
Yeah, okay.
So at this point, we're seeing that we now have the luxury of creating things for no reason, versus before it was all for necessity, defense, economic gain. Now we have enough resources to just do it because it looks nice. And that's a theme that carried into today. Palaces are just because they look nice. So now we have established our Bianchi Trivium, and if we look at this map, we have our larger Trivium, which is our Piazza del Popolo, and our main entrance to the city of Rome. So Rome, recall, was a pilgrimage town. Because people weren't going to go all the way to Jerusalem and the Holy Land, they went to the next best thing, which was Rome, where all our original churches are. And the most important entrance is going to be here, because it's the north entrance where everyone from Europe is funneling in. And then I borrowed this from last semester. But remember, the Piazza del Popolo is going to be our entrance on the north, Trivium's down 3 ways. This one leads to the areas where the Pope's family lives. So he created the demand for it. He knew that there was cheap land that was unused. So he was like, I'm going to create a street. That way everyone will want to buy the land, but I own the land already. So it's going to be profitable for me and the future of my family. We have this one. Excuse me. Let me get some water.
Oh, good. Take your time.
Okay. This one is going to lead us to Capitol Hill, which is the base of Rome, with the Campidoglio. We're not going to talk about it today, but just know it's there. And then this is going to lead to another palazzo. And this is going to be our connection, or this one, into the Vatican. So although it's convoluted, there is a method to it. This is the St. Peter's, this is the bishop's seat. So now the Pope has a clear-cut path through the Campidoglio. And we also have Sixtus V's plan with the yellow. So all these churches are now connected, which are the pilgrimage sites. So Rome is becoming more interconnected. Now the piazza, when you enter, right, we have our countryside where our farmers are, we have our city wall, which we know is not Renaissance because it's still medieval fortress-like, was this. And although it's nice and open, there are no even facades, these are not symmetrical, and it looks like this. So it's not the best, especially when you're coming from cities like Florence that are really nice at the time. This doesn't seem all that impressive. And when it's not impressive, people are gonna leave. So we carve our streets out. We have our Piazza del Popolo. And so now the issue is, how do we make this look grand? Because these already look nice, but how do we make that look better? And so what we do is we create these side wings. So now it becomes an oval because the oval is the symbol of Rome as the center of the Christian world. And at this time, we have our Protestant religions popping up, and they're becoming a threat to the Catholic Church. So they're especially concerned with saying we're the one true religion, and all these other ones are fake. Now they add their twin churches, which is what I talked about today, and that sense of symmetry and uniformity, even though these are not the same size. And then, of course, the Pope who made this, Alexander VII, adds his family crest. So he's from the Chigi family of Siena, which is a very hilly city, which makes sense why it's hills on their crest.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a literal reference to the geography of where they come from. So this is now what we're left with. Nice, grand, open, 3 directions, Campidoglio, Vatican, and then papal properties. And now we have the concept of teatri. So because we have these new carved out pieces, you can't help but wonder what happens behind these. And it's exactly what you think. They just fix up the street and what's on it, and then what's behind it, they leave exactly the same. So it's called the teatri, like a theater. The front looks really nice, and it's really just what you want the visitor to see, and then what's behind it, we don't care about. That's the backstage. It's what makes the city function, but it's not pretty. So in 1670, we do have an English traveler, and he says that there isn't a town in the world that has beautiful churches, convents, and the palaces are so noble, and everything else is so mean, which at the time just meant ugly. So a good example of teatri, which was a project also undergone by this Pope, Alexander VII, is Santa Maria della Pace, which is a small church here. And the reason it's popular is because it opens after noon. So usually most churches only open during the morning, and if you're a banker or you actually have a job that has a schedule, you can't go to church. So this church decides to open in the afternoons to cater to those people, which are going to be kind of like our white collar workers of back in the day, so a higher class than everyone else. And because they're a higher class, they're going to use carriages at this time. So notice that in the urban fabric, there is no really clear-cut street, and there are streets here and here and here, but we can't see them because it's such a tight grain. So what we do is we cut out this square here. And so Alexander VII decides to use his power of eminent domain, and he chops off the front of the homes on either side. So now we at least have somewhere where a carriage could come, turn around, and leave, versus before where there was a lot of congestion and traffic. And this concept of teatri is super apparent here because you can see he gives it a whole new facade. So now this looks like a grand little square, when in reality it's actually really, really tiny. And in section, the street comes in, it opens up into the space, matching facades all around. And I did have the Google to show somewhere. There we go. So you can see the facades don't quite match as you come into the space. But once you're there, it's kind of like this whole little theater around you that looks pretty. And the streets go through here, but you can barely tell, and it's all dark and ugly. That's the backstage. And notice they don't even care to finish this side. And then the street also runs through over there. And then look at the fact that now we have this random triangle room on the second floor.
Yeah.
Because they chopped it off. Right, and so we probably have his family crest somewhere. It's probably this, to be honest. You see the 7 little hills. So we know that it was given to the city by him. So that's the general idea of how Rome and Baroque planners are doing things at this time. They're not bothering to fix the whole thing. They're just bothering to fix certain areas where we know important people are going to come in and giving those nice facades. Now back in the Vatican, we have St. Peter's being rebuilt at the time. So the old one, recall, is the original Basilica by Constantine, where we have the procession, the baptized, and then the unbaptized behind the secondary screen. Now at this point, they wanted to rebuild it to look more nice and Baroque. So we have our Baroque dome and everything, so it's larger, right on top of the old one. And so the problem, or the thing they're facing now, is how do we create a forecourt for it that marks it as the church of the Catholic religion? So we hire Bernini, our main guy that we also talked about today. And remember in the Louvre, he was creating all these curves and stuff, which he gets from projects like these. So the new forecourt has to meet 5 requirements. First, the site is going to be sloped to the river down this way. So he has to somehow create something that's gradual. Secondly, you have to leave the existing papal palace where it is, which is literally where this greenery is. So if you think about it and you're trying to make a big oval forecourt, you would eat into what the palace is. So he can't necessarily make the big forecourt right there either. Number 3, it has to be large enough to accommodate thousands of people and easy enough to travel around for blessings. And the word gives us a hint, around. You don't want it to be a square, you want it to be roundish. And even today, the Pope has this little cart where he kind of goes around spraying holy water in that piazza. And lastly, it has to be something that's going to fix the fact that St. Peter's ended up too short. So originally, this in the front was supposed to have these 2 big towers, so that as you looked at it from the front, it looked nice and grand. But because they miscalculated the structural stresses, they were not able to do it. And so it ended up looking like this. So I'll backtrack really quick. This is what the Vatican looks like at the time. Uneven facades. We have our papal properties one on top of the other as they're trying to be better than the last pope. St. Peter's, you can't even tell where it is at this point, and that's not good. We want it to look prominent. So Bernini comes up with this design where we have our oval marking the center of the Christian world. We have our arms so the Pope can go around giving his blessing, and because our papal properties are right here, he solves that issue by not putting the oval here, but extending it down. So now what we create is a focal point for the church here, and then a political entry / religious entry right here into the Vatican. So if you're on business, right, you just go through here into the palace. But if you're here for religious reasons, you go straight forward. And this is what it ends up looking like in the end. So what he does is he creates 4 rows of columns on each arm. So this is the papal palace right here. That's the problem we have. And then we have this nice long slope. So now it's gradual rather than being like a random staircase or having this be flat and then a big staircase at the end. It just slopes gently. Now we do have 4 columns on each of these, and the idea behind this is if you are standing in the center, it looks like this. Everywhere you look, they're all neatly aligned. But then as you begin to move into other areas, you can begin to see them pop behind each other, and so it creates this play of shadow and light and interest on that screen. And so if you're a wealthy individual, you would probably wait under the shade here as you watch the papal procession. If you're not, you're just going to be under the sun with everyone else. But you can still see into it because they all lead into that central part where he's going to be. Now originally, the piazza was going to have this piece down here, so carriages could enter on either side, so it looks like a more complete circle. But because it was the last thing to be built, by the time they got to it, they were like, you don't really need it. It's
Yeah.
such a large entrance and there's such a volume of traffic that it would just be better to omit it altogether. And it already has a sense of enclosure, so let's just keep it that way. And so that's why that was never constructed. I'm gonna backtrack really quick just to show you this image. So if you notice, Bernini meets the requirement of fixing the fact that this facade is too short. So the towers were supposed to go here, and if we kind of remove that, it just kind of looks like a block, which isn't what your church should look like. So by adding in this really long lower colonnade, by contrast, the church now looks bigger and prominent. So he fixes that issue. He fixes the forecourt issue. He creates a slope. And then what we see is that the Pope lives in these windows. So if the Pope wants to not go out to the plaza, he can just give his blessing from up here and we can still see him. So it's tall enough to cover what's going on behind it, but short enough to still make this look tall. So he finds the right proportion for it. And then on this branch, which you recall is almost like chopping a little piece of the papal property off, he creates a stair integrated into that arm. So at the end of it, we have what we call the Scala Regia, which is this really beautiful stair that leads into the properties. And so what this does is, again, if you are here on a diplomatic mission, you don't go into this area. You go through the arm into the staircase. And so we are respecting the fact that this is a religious site by not having like business in it, but we're also using the dual nature of it to impress our diplomatic visitors in this area. And the Scala, for the stair, has these really long steps that are very short in height, which I was telling the class is usually used when you have a very grand or political entrance. So if you look at the steps of like the Capitol of the US or courthouses, they're not your average 7.5-inch steps. They're usually broader. Or if you think about like those nice landscape stairs, right? They're a lot longer because you want to create more comfort as you go up. So this thing could have easily ended here at that height and had a sharper slope, but that doesn't look as nice as this, where it looks gradual and it creates the sense of perspective. And we have our nice Bernini, vaulting going over there. And then the other thing about staircases is you don't get winded as you go up. So you can have a conversation with a diplomat as you go up the stairs. And I told them this story. I went to Phoenix a couple years ago to the Phoenix Central Library with the architect, and he created the steps to be shorter than usual. And he's like 90 years old. He went up 6 flights of steps, and he did not stop talking the whole time. I was kind of out of breath, and some other people were, but he didn't stop talking the whole time because it was made accessible for people that can't climb really high steps.
Yeah.
So it was comfortable, which you want here because you're here to have, business. You don't want to be tired when you get to the top of stairs. And that's pretty much it. So it was really just a show of how the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope, has now gained power at the top of that pyramid, and how he manifests that in the urban grid, where we see our trivium, the concept of teatri, and making the streets look nice, but leaving everything else ugly. And that's where we're going to start our urban reform. And then we see today's lecture with the palaces do a similar thing, where they're beautifying the area as you get into the palace, not necessarily caring about what's behind the palace or the squares we looked at the beginning either. But it always starts small, right? And eventually you're going to want to beautify the whole city, which is what we're going to talk about on Thursday and then next week.
Okay.